For decades, parents have lamented the state of the public education system and the dumbing down of generations of children. In response, organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are investing millions of dollars in programs they say are designed to improve that system. Now, critics like Dr. James Tracy of memorygap.org are warning that these so-called cures are just more of the same technocratic manipulation that created the problem in the first place. This is the GRTV feature interview with your host James Corbett and our special guest, Dr. James F. Tracy. Well, I'd like to start today by talking about a very interesting and important article you wrote called The Technocratization of Public Education, detailing some of the history of the last century or so of very elite and well-connected families funding thinkers who want to shape the public education system. And you start out that article with a very specific discussion of a Gates Foundation-funded program called the Measures of Effective Teachers Project. So perhaps you can tell us about this project and its significance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Measures of Effective Teachers Project is part of a $45 million plan to quantify, to measure school teachers' alleged efficiency in delivering the public school curriculum. The project has a great many individuals involved, including academic psychologists, sociologists, education scholars, even a statistician from the RAND Corporation. The experiment began in 2009 and focuses mainly on inner city schools. Now, the whole idea behind this is the establishment of a metrics for identifying techniques to maintain young people's attention spans. This looks to be, in part, a type of audience research, complete with galvanic skin bracelets to measure student behaviors and reactions. So the ostensible use of the data will be to determine how teachers will be hired, compensated, promoted, and so on. We have to be put on guard when we hear terms such as measurement or quantification, especially when it comes to education and teaching, because these were the techniques originally used to bring psychology into the American educational enterprise to begin with. The fact that this is being done to mainly African American and Latino children in inner city schools should also call to mind how early social science has been used to perpetuate eugenics and emphasize the alleged racially specific inferiorities of non-whites. So the project overall essentially involves the dehumanization of what is an inherently human process, that is, cultivating individuals to recognize and aspire to a higher intellectual level. The public school curriculum, the abundance of standardized testing, and now programs like these collectively act as a harness on real education. It's an attempt to refine the psychological conditioning and curriculum delivery process for a curriculum that is more or less dead on arrival and intended to discourage independent thought and curiosity.
Well, as you point out in this article, this specific project from the Gates Foundation is really only the latest and the most high-tech step in a century-long process that has been attempting to apply various psychological conditioning techniques in the public school system. So let's talk about those techniques in the American education system context. Who brought these techniques to the American public education system, and why did they do that?
Mm-hmm. There's a broad historical context for this that is rooted in European history and political thought that's largely been overlooked by most academics. This dates to at least the 17th century. However, if we are to locate a single individual and condition for the state of education today, we have to look to Wilhelm Wundt, who is the Prussian professor of psychology at the University of Leipzig in the late 19th century. When American higher education was in the process of being professionalized, most Americans who sought to obtain the professional academic degree, the Doctor of Philosophy, went to Germany to study. Ironically, a Doctor of Philosophy in Wundtian psychology was a PhD essentially devoid of any appreciation for or training in philosophy. Wundt developed what he termed experimental psychology, where the measurement and the recording of behavior or other observable phenomena was seen as necessary for knowledge production. In this framework, the human subject was recognized as devoid of any soul, will, or self-determination. Anything that could not be quantified was bracketed off and not worthy of consideration. The research subject, individuals or groups of individuals, came to be recognized as a stimulus response mechanism, and thus without will, they became docile and essentially dehumanized entities. So Wundt trains a great many American psychologists who returned from Germany and essentially established the field of psychology in the United States. They are largely behavioristic in their research approaches. For example, John Dewey is trained at Johns Hopkins by a student of Wundt's, G. Stanley Hall. Dewey and other Wundtians like James McKean Cattell, James Earl Russell, and Edward Thorndike go on to apply experimental psychological techniques to somewhat famously revise the educational practices at and found Columbia Teachers College at Columbia University. So with this, students come to be increasingly recognized as test subjects or stimulus response mechanisms. Wundt's disciples are especially influential because they have developed the psychological discipline, and they're at the leading institutions like Columbia, Johns Hopkins, and Chicago. These psychologists believed they were part of ushering in a new age. In many ways, they were. They sought to bring about a new being that would more readily adapt to a socialist state, or what they termed the Great Society. This was a vision of progressive activists of the period for education specifically. The conditions and sentiment are similar in sociology, which in some way provides the basis for experimental psychology's application in educational settings. The sociologists Robert Park and Albion Small had also been trained in Germany in the late 19th century and subsequently established the famous Chicago School of Sociology at the University of Chicago in the early 1900s. A specific conceptualization of society in German social scientists at the time is that society is a functioning organism akin to a biological entity. This was termed the organismic theory of society and is developed by German social theorist Albert Schaffel and the English sociologist Herbert Spencer in the late 1800s. Schaffel and Spencer exert a tremendous influence on early American sociology through the Chicago School. And Robert Park, it is fairly well known, uses the city of Chicago as a living laboratory to study various social phenomena. The first undergraduate sociology textbook, An Introduction to the Study of Society, is written by Small and George Vincent. And Vincent is the vice chancellor of the Chautauqua system of education. In this book, Small and Vincent discuss how the society is a psychophysical communicating apparatus, with the individual being a communicating and terminal cell in the social biological organism. In the view of the early American sociologists, a threat to the functioning of the collective organism is posed in the transition from community to society. There was a fear and a suspicion of the mob or the rabble, and a way of taming and disarming that threat was through educational practices employing the new psychology. If individuals can be deprived of their self-determination, they will be more efficiently managed cells and readily integrated constituents of the social organism, whether the organism be a city, a nation state, or a planetary population. There will be no cause for dissent if one is devoid of their individuality and will and are absorbed into the collective.
Well, and perhaps in a way you've kind of just answered this, but let's flesh that out a little. So from your research, why are rich families like the Rockefellers and the Gates, historically, why have they been funding these types of programs? What purpose do they serve for these types of people?
I think there are a number of reasons, and your listeners, and I think that some of the global research audience will be aware of these to at least some degree. U.S. tax laws beginning in 1913 under the Federal Reserve Act allow for wealthy families like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies to establish tax-free foundations where such families can dole out money to interests and projects they deem worthy. This allows them to steer much of the social and scientific research of academic, government, and private entities. The practice of philanthropy, made possible by such laws, has helped to salvage and prop up the public image of these families. John D. Rockefeller, for example, John D. Sr., regarded the $45 million donated to the founding of the University of Chicago as his greatest investment, because the public identifies education with scientific progress and social uplift. For the Rockefeller family, it was a public relations coup. The key for any philanthropic project is to make it look as if the money is somehow benefiting the public. This burnishes the image of the philanthropic entity in the public eye. If we look more closely at what types of projects are being funded and have been funded over the years, we can see how some of these powerful families are really much more concerned with things like social engineering. For example, you look at the millions of dollars that the Rockefeller Foundation puts into the green movement. Not only does it make that family look good, it also creates a semblance of a serious problem that can be used to shape social behavior and a host of related agendas. Another example is the Measure of Effective Teachers project of the Gates Foundation that we're discussing. It sounds nice on the surface, but this is a multi-million-dollar undertaking that transforms public school classrooms into psychological laboratories complete with human test subjects. And how will the information be used? Will the information be used to assist in helping to overcome resistance to vaccine programs in developing nations? Will it be used to program video games and so-called educational software? The public is told that the Gates want to help teaching in schools, but this in all likelihood is a way to gain access to a particularly vulnerable group of human subjects and generate a wealth of data for future projects in social engineering. These wealthy individuals also live in a world apart from the rest of the Earth's population, both literally and figuratively. Once someone has incredible riches, they often develop the belief that they're a few steps above mere mortals and actually know what's best for the human race and the planet that we're on. If the population has been socially conditioned to be stimulus response mechanisms and behave like animals, if they've been trained in such a way as to overlook their self-determination, then it's especially convenient for these elites, or at least a portion of them, to regard the masses as nothing more than mere livestock. This is what spokespersons for wealthy interests such as Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann asserted back in the 1920s, that the public is dumb, that the public has an average IQ of about 100. The masses are driven by irrational drives. They're hopeless spectators. What figures such as Lippmann and Bernays don't say is that the public has to a large degree been made this way through mass education and mass media. This is really blaming the victims of propaganda and social psychological conditioning. So the public is increasingly thought of as superfluous, apart from its economic necessity as labor power. Again, if you consider the ideas of Ray Kurzweil, Nicholas Negroponte, or Bill Joy, and I know that you've discussed some of these on your program, for example, James, the global elites have their sights set years ahead of what we're taught to think about in news and popular culture. Their world is what is presented to us as science fiction. They have a vision that's much different from what the broader public has been taught to anticipate, I think.